My name is Rosette Goldstein. I was born in Paris, France, September 16th, 1938. My parents were born in Poland, in Lodz. And eventually, the families, both families, as a matter of fact, went to Germany, where education was easier to get. So both young people and their families went to Berlin. Of course, Berlin was very exciting at that time. Things were good. But 1936, things started happening. And bit by bit, Jews were no longer welcome. In the years between 1936 and 1940, when Hitler was in charge, people tried to get out. Jewish people tried to get out. They tried to go everywhere they could, wherever they could get a visa, wherever they could run. It wasn't very easy. My father's father went to what was then Palestine with his older son. His daughter, one of his daughters, was in Paris with her husband and 2 children. Another daughter was supposed to go to England with her son and husband. Another son ended up staying in Germany with his wife and 2 daughters. On my mother's side, one of my aunts went to Cuba, from Cuba to the United States. One of my uncles ended up getting the okay to go to Brazil. My other aunt and uncle made it to Palestine. The others couldn't get out. My aunt in France asked my father to come to France. He was going out with my mother at the time, and the families knew each other from Poland. And he ended up joining the French army. He sent for my mother, and they got married in 1937 in Paris. I was born in 1938. And my father, who had worked for his father as a baker, had no problem finding work in France. And my mother was a dressmaker. And we had moved into an apartment house where we were the only Jews. We were in the Marais section at 79 Rue du Temple. All our neighbors were very friendly and became friends with my parents. And for a little while there, things were okay. France and Britain were in the war with Germany. And unfortunately, 1940 came. 1940, France capitulated, and things were bad. There was an influx of foreign Jews in France. They were running from everywhere, wherever they could. And it became very, very difficult. And because France started to collaborate, things changed very quickly. The government changed, and became the Vichy government. And pretty soon, there were many things happening as far as Jews were concerned. Jews in Paris, actually all over France, had to stop being teachers, had to stop being lawyers. They were not allowed to shop except at certain times, and could not be teachers. Why? Because they were Jews. And the French collaborated with the Nazis. In France, we called them Boches, dirty Nazis, sale Boches. And pretty soon, things started changing even more. Jews were being arrested, especially men. Jews were not allowed to be hired. You went all over Paris and you saw signs on the stores. Jews not allowed. Jews not allowed to ride in the subways except in the last train. Now, that reminds me of something that happened here in America. Well, my father was not able to find work. He'd been thrown out of the army because he was Jewish. They didn't want Jewish men in the army. So he was thrown out. I was very little, but I do remember the noise of the bombs. I do remember the air raids, and I do remember my mother grabbing my hand, running down the 5 flights of stairs because we were on the 5th floor, and going to a basement where all of our neighbors would gather. But I don't know really how much I was aware of what was happening and why. And somehow, life went on. My father read somewhere that they were looking for people to work in camps in the French outside French country side outside of Paris. Why? Because you see, Germany needed workers. Their men were all in the army. So, what better way than to hire Jews to do certain work that they needed? So he applied. And he was given a paper that said that if he was working in the French and German interest, they would protect his family. Of course, that was a lie. But he felt he was going to be able to work, make a little bit of money, and that we would be protected. So he ended up being sent to a small camp outside of Paris. In the meantime, things were really bad in Paris. Worse and worse. People were being arrested, and we had to wear the yellow star. But not only did we have to wear it, we had to go to the French police station and purchase it, buy it. And if you wore a star on your coat, took your coat off, you better have another one there to be on your clothes. And these stars were sewn on your clothes. You see, they had also taken a census of all the Jews coming into France. So they knew where everyone was. And pretty soon, the first time, they arrested 3,000 Jewish men and sent them to the camps. Then they decided to have something called the spring wind. They arrested 13,000 Jews and brought them to a place called the Veldiv. The Veldiv was a place where they had indoor bicycle races. See, the French love bicycle races. They love to ride bicycles. And this place was indoors so that they could ride in the wintertime. So they arrested 13,000 Jews, old people, young children. They went into the schools, and it was the French police who did that. They went into the schools. They went to the apartments. They went into the hospitals and arrested these people. Well, this place was very good for bicycle riding, but to have 13,000 people in there for days with maybe 3, 4 bathrooms, people died, people committed suicide, people got sick. We were lucky. They didn't come for us. We were in a building where I told you before we were the only Jews. And my father was already working in the countryside. Finally, they came for those people about 3, 4 days later with buses, and they sent them to concentration camps in France. Yes. They were concentration camps in France. They were not death camps, but people died because they had no food. And it was terrible. So first, from those camps, they sent the men to Poland. They sent them on French trains. You see, the French railroad decided to collaborate. They had a meeting in 1940, and the president of the French railroad said, "We will collaborate." The word, collaborate. And they did. So they took those people and they sent them. Then they sent the mothers from those camps. And then France did not want to keep the children that they would have had to take care of. And the Germans said, "We don't want them right now." Well, the French sent them anyway, to their death. And this kept on. 76,000 people, French Jews, non-French Jews, just Jews, were sent to their death on that railroad. Gypsies were sent on those trains. Our own soldiers later on, who came to free us, they were sent on those French trains. to their death. The French railroad took them to the end of France, where the German trains took over. The French trains had to clean the cars and take whatever these souls had left on those trains. And they kept that going during the whole Second World War. My mother was having problems trying to get food because Jews were not allowed to shop until the afternoon, and everything was gone from the shelves. And they really didn't know, my father and my mother, what they were going to do. Yes, our neighbors were good. They helped us. One of our neighbors used to make theater clothes for actors, and she asked my mother to do some sewing, and she would give her a little bit of money. But it was really not enough to survive with a little child. So my father was in the camp in Maine-et-Loire, which is in the countryside. And at first, they worked, and what they did was they were lumberjacks in the forest cutting trees. Can you imagine being a doctor, a lawyer, a storekeeper? This is what you had to do. There were 70 men in that camp. And in the evening, after they finished work, they were allowed at the beginning to go into the countryside, into the little farms, and buy a little something to send back to their families. Well, my dad met a farmer, and he would go there every night. And he would help him with the chores. And they got along famously, and they really liked each other. His name was Monsieur Martin. And one day, my dad said to him, Monsieur Martin, you know what's happening. You know how they are hunting us. I have a little girl. She's almost 4. And my wife and I are terrified for her. Would you hide her? Monsieur Martin said, I don't know. I mean, you know what can happen to us. I have a family. I have 3 daughters. And if they find out, or if anybody knows in the town and decides to tell someone, I don't know. I have to talk to my wife. So the next day, my dad went to the farm, and Monsieur Martin said what we were talking about yesterday. I have 3 daughters. We'll have 4. This is how I came to go to the Martin family and be hidden. But it wasn't that easy. My father got in touch with my mother, and my mother was to prepare me. And she did. She told me that she could not bring me because it was too dangerous, and that I would be going with Monsieur Raffat, who was our neighbor, and that if I was to go on the train, I was not to talk. And if anybody asked me, that Monsieur Raffat was my dad. Wow. 4 years old. Now, I knew things were happening because children know during the war. They listen. They listen to the grown-ups. But I didn't know what Jew was. All I knew was that I was that. I was Jew. But I didn't know what it meant. Only that I was being hunted. That much I knew. And what I'm telling you, as far as my mother preparing me, there are some things that I remember and some that I don't. But I do remember getting to the train station with Monsieur Rafa, getting on that train and seeing next to me at the window all these soldiers with guns. And I was scared. I don't think I wanted to talk. So nobody asked me any questions. And I was very quiet. And when I got to the farm, there were a lot of people there. And it was time for supper. And my dad was there. And I adored my dad. And that made it okay. My mom wasn't there, but being with my dad was wonderful. So we ate supper, and French farmers always have cider on the table, hard cider, and I was very thirsty. So, of course, I drank a little too much for a 4-year-old, and I got a little, tipsy, I guess we'd call it, and they put me to bed. The next morning, I got up. My dad was gone. Monsieur Rafa was gone. And I was with strangers. But things were not so bad because Dad was coming every night to see me. He would play with me. I would go to the end of the little path from the farm and wait for him. And he would come in an old bicycle that Monsieur Martin had given him. And he would whistle a tune, and I would be waiting, and he would hug me and play with me. And this went on every night. One day, all of a sudden, my mother was there. How she got there, I don't know. I have no idea. My mother, after the war, never spoke of the war. I was never even able to ask her questions because she would never answer. She just did not, she just shut it out. So she was there, and that night my father stayed at the farm, and we're a family. Again. All of a sudden, the next morning, my dad had gone to the forest, and all of a sudden there are soldiers breaking in the door. Where is David Adler? Monsieur Martin says he went to work in the forest. If he is not back in 1 hour, we are taking all of you. And they left. Monsieur Martin saddled his horse, went to the forest, told my father. My father went right back to the camp. My mother disappeared. I didn't see her until the end of the war. But me, they forgot. What they did to punish my father was they took away his French citizenship. Not only his, but mine. Even though I had been born in France. So we had no state. We didn't belong anywhere. After that, we went on. Everything was okay for a little while. I can't tell you time-wise because I was a little girl and time was not something that I can think about. I went on and played in the yard, and I had no toys. I played with pumpkin seeds. That's how I learned how to count. And every night I would wait for my dad. And I would go with Odile and with all the girls and pick apples, pick potatoes. And that was my life. And one day, I was waiting for Dad at the end of the little path, as I did every night. And I didn't see the bicycle. And I waited and waited. And then all of a sudden, I saw a carriage, a horse and carriage, coming really very fast. And it was Monsieur Martin. And he got to me and he got out and he grabbed me and he said, they were taken. As little as I was, I knew what that meant. And I knew that probably I would never see my dad again. Why? Because of that word. Because of the word Jew that I didn't understand. That's why. And I did never see my dad again. And things went on at the farm. He was taken along with the other men on a train, SNCF, French train. And he was taken to a holding camp in Paris. And he waited there for 2 weeks. And they were taken on convoy number 64. Yeah, there had been already 64 convoys, 1,000 people on those convoys, all crowded together with straw on the floor. Some of them were cattle cars and no food. And the French railroad closed the doors on those carts. And they got to Birkenau. And they were, because they had been working in the woods and they were strong, they were picked to work. And they ended up in a sub-camp of Auschwitz called Monowitz. And there they worked. One day, and I found this out after the war from someone, I found this out not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, that one day at roll call, my dad was not there. My dad was not at roll call that morning. He had been sent to another camp, a camp called Grossrosen. From Grossrosen, he was sent to Buchenwald. And from Buchenwald, he was sent to a sub-camp called Langenstein-Zwieberg, which was in the Harz Mountains of Germany. What were they doing there? They were digging inside the mountain so that they could build parts for the Luftwaffe. And of course, working inside a mountain, people got sick. They didn't last long. But the Nazis didn't care because there was plenty of labor to be gotten. from the other camps. My father had gotten there in February. April 6, 1945, my father was murdered. April 11th, our American Army freed that camp. The Nazis had left already and left all the bodies outside. The American Army had the townspeople bury them in one single grave. So I know that my father is in a mass grave in Linigenstein-Zwieberg. There is a memorial on top of this grave. And I did go there. And I did say Kaddish for my father. My mother is still in the apartment. And I'm still with the Martin family. And I'm playing in the yard, playing with the pumpkin seeds. And all of a sudden, I see a green truck, a large green truck, and I knew what it was. I ran into the house and said, Madame Martin, they are here. She grabbed my hand, took me in the bedroom. It's a two-room farmhouse, okay? And all us girls slept together. And she takes me and she lifts the bedding, the mattress, and puts me face down on the spring. You see, at that time, we had springs which were open, not a box. She put me down with my face down so I could breathe and put everything on top of me. They came in, they looked around, they came into the bedroom. And she had also told me to be quiet. Well, I was too scared to talk anyway. And they took everything they could as far as food, as fruit, and things like that that we had. And they left. Another miracle. Well, it happened again. This time I was with Odile, the youngest daughter. We used to go and watch the cows graze. And we came back to the farm, and she saw them at the end of the path. And she grabbed me, and there was a ladder which was against the silo where we kept food for the cows. And we climbed right up there, and we stayed there. And again, they did the same thing. They looked through the whole farm area, through the house and everything, took whatever they could, and left. Well, time went on. Every day was the same. Pick apples, eat potatoes every night, because you see, they picked up everything every day, all the food that the farm produced. It was a small farm. But Madame Martin used to take the cream, a little bit every day from the milk, and we made butter. They were very good to me. I went to church every Sunday with them, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't go to catechism with Odile and wear a beautiful white dress and veil when she was confirmed. But they never tried to change me. 1945, our American Army came in, and we used to sit outside, and one of the help would play the accordion and play the Marseillaise, the French national anthem, because we knew that the war was over and that we would be free. And that was an exciting time. And all of a sudden, my mother came. She walked. She hitchhiked because the train tracks were blown. And she got there, but we already knew. We already knew that my dad wasn't coming back. We already knew that most of our family was gone. And she took me back to Paris. And we lived in that one-room apartment on the 5th floor. And she didn't know what to do with me. She had to work. She was alone. Paris was a shambles. So she put me in a Jewish camp where they were gathering children who had lost their parents during the war. This was Jewish organizations. I believe it might have been called the Bricha. They were going through all of Europe and gathering children that had been hidden, children who were alone, that had no more parents, and bringing them to these camps. Actually, it was very nice. It was in a castle outside of Paris. And it was there that I learned what Jew was. It was there that I learned that I am Jew. It was there that I learned my love for Judaism, being Jewish, being proud. Fortunately, it didn't last long. It lasted 6 months because the children were going to be brought to Israel, but I still had a mother. So they only took children who had no parents. So I was with my mother, and my mother was, I guess, pretty assimilated. She didn't, pray or anything. She knew what she was. She had come from an Orthodox home, but after the war. And here was this little girl who washed her hands and said the prayers before eating and so on. But she didn't know what to do with me. She couldn't keep me home and work. So she sent me to a woman who used to watch children in Brittany. And they were all the children were older than me, and they used to beat me up. She had to take me out. Then she sent me to a convent. Didn't know what to do. In the convent, the sisters were very mean. This is after the war. And I got dysentery. So she had to take me out again. It was very, very hard. And finally, she asked the Martin family if they would take me back for a while. And they said yes. So I started going to school in Volandry, where they were. And I made friends. And nobody cared whether I was Jewish or not. And then all of a sudden, my mother decided to send me to the United States on a visitor's visa to my aunt. This was 1949. So by that time, I was 10 and a half. And I went back to Paris. And then she sent me by myself to Cherbourg, where the ship was waiting. I went there by train. And I went on the ship, the Queen Elizabeth, by myself. I was sick for 5 days during the crossing. If it wasn't for the nice steward that took care of me. Now, we were 5 in a cabin. It wasn't any, we weren't going on a cruise. He took care of me. He brought me food. He tried to help me. And then I get to New York. I don't speak a word of English. And they don't want to let me off the ship because my mother had forgotten to give me the certificate that I had a shot. So I had to wait till everybody got off the ship and get another shot. My aunts and some cousins were waiting. And that was my introduction to the United States. My aunt put me in school the following week. And it was wonderful. The kids, I guess the teacher must have explained to the kids, what I was. So they used to pick me up in the morning and bring me home at night with ice cream after school. The United States opened its arms to me. I fell in love with this country. I was reborn in this country. And although my mother had sent me as a visitor, I did not want to go back. So for 2 years, I went to school. I went to camp. When I came back from camp, I spoke English. I spoke English with an accent. That wasn't good enough. I wanted to be American, and I practiced. And finally, after 2 years, I told my mother knew I wasn't going to come back. I didn't want to. So she came here. And like I said before, this country that I was reborn in, is my country. I married an American Jew, Gil Goldstein. I had 2 children. I had 5 grandchildren, and now I have 2 great-grandchildren. This is still my country, with the bad and the good. Why do I do this? Because I owe. You know those miracles I spoke about? There was a reason. You know when I said that I went to Langenstein and said Kaddish, that's when I realized, that's when I knew that I had to come back here and I had to speak. That's when I knew. And I am going to do this as long as I can, because although things are not great right now, although we see something that happened once before, we have to fight it. And this is our way, the survivors, the ones who are still here. This is what we have to do.